The Terran vessel Aurora was not just any spacecraft. It was one of the most advanced exploration ships ever built by humanity. Its hull gleamed under the artificial light of its docking bay, polished to perfection. And every system had been checked and rechecked by engineers who had poured years of knowledge into its construction. For Captain Alina Markov, standing on the observation deck as the last preparations were made, it was the culmination of her lifelong dream. She had spent decades training for missions that would take her beyond the familiar stars near Terra, into regions of space that were largely unknown, dangerous, and filled with mysteries humanity had only imagined in stories and simulations. The excitement of the mission was tempered by a quiet, creeping sense of apprehension. There was something about venturing into the void, where nothing familiar existed, that made even the most seasoned crew members uneasy. The crew itself was hand-picked for their skills, experience, and resilience. Each member had a history of operating in high-stakes situations. From space combat simulations to deep space research missions, they had undergone months of joint training exercises, simulating conditions of extreme isolation, system failures, and psychological stress. Yet none of these preparations could truly capture the feeling of leaving the last known light of Terra behind, knowing that once they crossed a certain point, no one could reach them easily, and communication delays would grow into hours, days, or even weeks. As the countdown began, the Aurora hummed with life. Its engines were a marvel of engineering, designed to navigate both known and unknown sectors of space with unprecedented efficiency. The bridge was a complex web of screens, holographic displays, and control panels, each manned by a crew member monitoring vital signs, propulsion, navigation, and environmental conditions. Captain Markov moved among them, her presence a steadying force, offering a calm word here, a reassuring nod there. She knew the eyes of her crew were on her, that they trusted her judgment in a place where even the smallest mistake could be catastrophic. The departure was smooth, almost eerily so. As the Aurora left the docking bay and entered the orbiting lanes above Terra, the city lights below faded into a blur of distance. The blue-green hue of the planet slowly receded into the blackness of space. The familiar stars that had guided explorers for centuries seemed to wink at them as if bidding farewell. For many crew members, this was a moment of awe, a rare pause in the relentless rhythm of their mission. They looked out through the reinforced glass of the observation deck, feeling the thrill of being pioneers on the edge of the known universe. Yet, as the ship moved farther from Terra, a subtle tension began to creep into the cabin. It started with small, almost imperceptible irregularities. The navigation systems occasionally flickered, displaying coordinates that seemed off by mere fractions, but enough to make the officers double-check their calculations. Communications with Terra, which had been smooth and clear at first, began to show slight delays and distortions. Messages that took minutes to transmit now returned with strange static and occasional gaps in data. It was nothing catastrophic, but it was enough to remind everyone aboard that they were entering a region of space where human technology had rarely ventured. Captain Markov convened a meeting in the strategy room. The walls were lined with screens showing maps of the surrounding sectors, real-time data from the ship's sensors and simulations of possible hazards. "We are entering an uncharted sector," she explained, her voice calm but firm. "Expect anomalies. Systems may behave unpredictably, and communication may be inconsistent. Our training covers this. Remember, we rely on each other, and we follow procedure. That is how we survive." Her words were meant to instill confidence, but beneath her calm exterior, she felt a gnawing unease. There was a subtle difference between simulations and the real void of space, a difference that no amount of preparation could fully bridge. The first days in the uncharted sector were the mixture of fascination and anxiety. Sensors picked up cosmic phenomena that no one had documented before: clouds of interstellar dust shimmering in colors that defied explanation, gravitational waves that subtly tugged at the ship's trajectory, and strange, intermittent bursts of radiation that were harmless yet enigmatic. The crew meticulously recorded every observation, knowing that this data could redefine humanity's understanding of the cosmos. Yet, for all the scientific excitement, there was an underlying fear, the knowledge that in this darkness, even a minor miscalculation could become fatal. As time passed, the subtle anomalies grew more pronounced. The navigation system would occasionally display coordinates that led into zones with no detectable stars, no cosmic markers, and no background radiation to guide them. It was as if the void itself was shifting around them, bending space in ways they could not predict. Crew members began speaking in hushed tones about the strangeness of the experience, the eerie feeling that they were not just traveling through space, but being watched by it. Some swore they saw fleeting shadows on the edges of their vision, while others reported a deep sense of isolation, a weight pressing on their minds that was impossible to describe. Captain Markov remained vigilant. She doubled down on routine checks, personally inspecting systems and reviewing sensor logs with her officers. She encouraged the crew to maintain their schedules, to exercise, eat properly, and get rest. "Discipline is our anchor," she reminded them repeatedly. The smallest lapse in judgment could be deadly in the void, where even a tiny malfunction could spiral into a life-threatening situation. She also emphasized the importance of communication. urging her crew to speak openly about fears, doubts, or strange experiences. Isolation could be as dangerous as any cosmic anomaly, and mental health was as critical as physical survival. Despite these measures, the psychological strain on the crew was palpable. Sleep became fragmented as the sense of endless darkness outside the hull played tricks on their minds. Some began dreaming vividly of Terra, of life they had left behind, of families and friends whose faces seemed impossibly distant. Others reported sudden bouts of irritability or despair, small cracks in camaraderie that, if left unchecked, could escalate into serious conflict. Captain Markov monitored these developments closely, holding private conversations with crew members, offering reassurance and perspective, and reminding them that survival depended on unity and trust. Then, one morning, the situation changed abruptly. Communications with Terra that had already been patchy went completely silent. No signals returned. No confirmations of message receipt. The crew checked every system multiple times. Everything on the ship was functioning, yet the link to the outside world had vanished. Panic threatened to rise, but Captain Markov maintained her composure. "We are not lost," she told them. "We are simply beyond the range of immediate communication. We continue our mission, we follow our procedures, and we take care of each other. That is all we can do right now." The silence outside became oppressive. With no external contact, the Aurora felt smaller, more fragile, as if the vast void were closing in around them. Stars became distant pinpoints of light, sometimes obscured by cosmic dust or drifting nebulae, leaving stretches of black that seemed infinite. The crew adjusted to this new reality gradually, focusing on the tangible tasks within the ship. They conducted experiments, monitored systems, and maintained the engines. Yet, in the quiet moments, staring out into the abyss, each member felt the humbling, terrifying truth. They were truly alone in a region where human presence was exceedingly rare. It was during these moments that the deeper mysteries of the void began to reveal themselves. Unexplained energy readings appeared on the sensors, fluctuations that had no identifiable source, appearing and disappearing in patterns too irregular to predict. Small malfunctions cropped up in the ship. Lights flickered, instruments gave false readings, and systems rebooted spontaneously. None of these events were immediately dangerous, but their cumulative effect reminded everyone aboard that even advanced technology was vulnerable to forces they did not understand. The crew of the Aurora had crossed a threshold. They were no longer merely explorers. They were pioneers facing a frontier that tested not just their skills, but their courage, judgment, and psychological resilience. They had left Terra behind, entered a region where communication was impossible, and confronted a darkness that was more than just the absence of light, was a presence that challenged their perceptions, their teamwork, and their resolve. Captain Markov, watching her crew and reflecting on the journey so far, understood that survival in the void would demand more than technical skill. It would demand trust, ingenuity, and a willingness to confront fear in its raw, most unyielding form. And so, the Aurora continued its journey, gliding silently through the black expanse, carrying humanity's hope, curiosity, and courage into the unknown. The adventure had truly begun, and the void awaited with all its hidden dangers and unexpected revelations, ready to test every member of the crew in ways they had never imagined. After the initial weeks of cautiously navigating the uncharted sector, the crew of the Aurora began to realize that the void was far more dangerous than they had imagined. At first, it had been subtle, the occasional glitch in the navigation system, brief static in communication, faint and unexplainable energy readings. Now, the anomalies had grown stronger, more frequent, and much harder to ignore. Every sensor beep, every flicker of light on a display felt like a warning. The ship, which had been a symbol of human engineering and resilience, suddenly seemed fragile, vulnerable to the invisible forces that surrounded it. The first clear sign that something unusual was happening came when the environmental controls began to act unpredictably. Life support systems, which should have maintained perfect oxygen and pressure levels, started giving off minor errors. The crew noticed fluctuations in temperature that could not be explained by external conditions. The oxygen level readings would spike or drop slightly, and then return to normal, but never in a pattern that made sense. Engineers worked tirelessly to identify the cause, running diagnostic programs and checking the ship's complex network of conduits and systems, yet the anomalies persisted. It was as if the void itself were interfering with their technology. Captain Markov called the senior officers together for an urgent meeting. The conference room, usually a place of calm discussion and planning, was tense. Each officer looked exhausted, their faces lined with worry from sleepless nights and constant vigilance. "We are encountering forces we cannot explain," she began, her voice steady, though not without an edge of concern. "Systems are being affected. Sensors are reading anomalies that have no known source. We must remain disciplined. Panic or rash decisions will only make the situation worse." Her words were meant to reassure, but everyone felt the weight of isolation pressing down. They were truly on their own, facing a threat they did not understand. Far from Terra or any help, the psychological strain on the crew became apparent quickly. Sleep cycles were disrupted as anxiety and fear settled into every corner of the ship. Some crew members began having vivid dreams, not the pleasant dreams of home or success, but dark, unsettling visions of failure, of losing their colleagues, or of being consumed by the void itself. Others reported sudden and intense feelings of despair, moments when the emptiness outside seemed to seep into their minds and distort reality. The isolation was not just physical, it was mental and emotional. Even the most experienced astronauts, it felt the creeping weight of uncertainty, and small disagreements began to surface among the crew. It was during this period of heightened tension that the first hallucinations began to appear. Lieutenant Rami, the ship's communications officer, reported seeing shadows moving just outside the observation windows, shapes that vanished when anyone else looked. Navigator Chen began to claim that the stars outside were shifting positions, not due to movement of the ship, but as if space itself were bending around them. Skepticism was the first reaction. Of course, Captain Markov reminded everyone that stress and isolation could play tricks on the mind, that their training included handling such psychological effects. Yet, as multiple crew members reported similar experiences, even the captain began to wonder if something more profound and inexplicable was occurring. Meanwhile, the anomalies affecting the ship's systems intensified. The propulsion system would occasionally register errors that forced the engineers to manually intervene. The hull sensors picked up minor vibrations with no identifiable cause, and power surges appeared in isolated circuits without explanation. These events were not catastrophic, but they were unnerving. The crew realized that they could not rely on the ship to function flawlessly in this environment. Every system had to be double-checked, every anomaly logged and analyzed. The Aurora might be advanced, but it was not invincible. Captain Markov understood that leadership in such a situation was not just about managing systems or following protocols. It was about managing fear. She held regular briefings with her crew, not just to provide technical updates, but to listen, to understand their concerns, and to remind them of their purpose. "We are explorers," she said in one briefing, "and every frontier comes with unknown dangers. We rely on each other, on our training, and on our discipline. Fear is natural, but it will not defeat us unless we allow it to." Her words were a lifeline, a reminder that unity and resolve were their most important tools. Despite her efforts, the tension continued to mount. Crew members who had once worked together seamlessly began to show signs of strain. Small arguments broke out over resource allocation, the interpretation of data, and even minor protocol decisions. Captain Markov intervened quickly, mediating disputes and ensuring that no conflict escalated into something more serious. She understood that in the void, human relationships could be as fragile as the ship itself. Maintaining trust and cohesion was not just desirable, it was essential for survival. The most unsettling development, however, was the realization that the void itself seemed almost alive. Sensor readings suggested the presence of energy fields that defied known physics. Some crew members felt it pressing against the ship, a subtle but constant force that influenced the vessel's trajectory. Others described a feeling of being watched, of an awareness outside the ship that reacted to their movements. There was no evidence of any physical entity, but the sensation was undeniable. It was a psychological and scientific mystery, one that blurred the line between reality and perception. Amidst this growing unease, the crew discovered strange anomalies on the ship's exterior. Tiny, almost imperceptible indentations appeared on the hull, as if something had brushed against it. They were not scratches from debris, and they were not consistent with the ship's own movements. Sensors recorded faint energy emissions in the same areas, readings that could not be explained by cosmic radiation alone. The engineering team examined the hull repeatedly, running simulations and scanning for structural weaknesses, yet the source remained a mystery. The crew began to whisper about the possibility of an external presence, something unseen but influential, manipulating the environment in subtle ways. Communication with Terra, already intermittent, became increasingly unreliable. Static and interference grew worse, and messages often returned corrupted, with portions missing or replaced by unintelligible signals. The crew had to repeat transmissions multiple times, and even then, confirmation of receipt was delayed. The feeling of isolation deepened. Without clear contact with home, the crew's sense of security eroded. They had trained for emergencies, for system failures and hostile encounters. But the absence of communication made every decision heavier, every action more consequential. Captain Markov remained vigilant, monitoring both the physical and psychological conditions aboard the ship. She implemented strict routines to keep the crew occupied and maintain their mental health. Scheduled exercises, maintenance tasks, scientific observations, and even group discussions were organized to prevent boredom, fear, and disorientation from taking hold. Despite these measures, the constant presence of the void, the unknown forces, and the ever-present threat of malfunction created a tension that never fully dissipated. It was clear to everyone aboard that they were facing more than just a technical challenge. They were confronting an environment that tested both the limits of human ingenuity and the resilience of the mind. Every decision mattered, every reaction to stress could have consequences. The void was not just empty space. It was a silent, pervasive force, shaping their experience and demanding constant vigilance. Captain Markov realized that survival would require more than expertise in navigation, engineering, or science. It would require courage, unity, adaptability, and an unwavering focus on the mission. The crew had to trust each other completely, support one another, and maintain their mental and emotional strength. Any lapse could be fatal, and yet, despite the mounting fear, the crew showed signs of resilience. They adapted, learned to anticipate anomalies, and developed routines to counteract the psychological strain. The crew's determination became a shared source of strength, a beacon against the encroaching darkness. The crew of the Aurora had endured weeks of constant stress, facing both real and perceived threats from the void. They had begun to understand that the unknown was not just a backdrop for exploration. It was a force that could shape their lives, test their limits, and reveal the true nature of their courage. Captain Markov, looking out at the endless blackness beyond the observation windows, knew that the challenges ahead would be even greater, but also that they had passed a critical threshold. The crew was no longer merely traveling through space. They were confronting the void itself, learning how to survive within it, and discovering the strength that comes from facing the unknown together. For the crew of the Aurora, weeks of isolation and unexplained anomalies had brought tension, fear, and uncertainty to a peak. They were living in a realm where familiar rules of space seemed distorted, where systems occasionally failed for no reason, and where the void outside felt almost alive, pressing against the ship in ways they could not fully understand. Yet, despite everything, a spark of hope appeared, one day unexpected, faint, and almost miraculous. It came in the form of a signal dot. At first it was barely detectable. The communication officer, Lieutenant Rami, noticed a small fluctuation on the long-range scanner. It was faint, barely above the level of background cosmic noise. He double-checked the readings, thinking it might be a false positive caused by interference from the void. But after running the signal through multiple filters, he realized it was deliberate, a transmission with structure, a pattern recognizable as intelligent communication. He immediately notified Captain Markov, whose heart skipped a beat. After weeks of silence and isolation, this was the first sign that they were not entirely cut off, that someone or something was reaching out. Captain Markov convened an emergency meeting on the bridge. Every senior officer gathered, their faces a mixture of exhaustion, hope, and skepticism. "We've detected a signal," she announced, her voice calm but carrying a note of excitement. "It is faint, distorted, but definitely intelligent. We do not know its source. Our task is to determine whether it is Terran, alien, or something else entirely. Proceed with caution. Maintain all standard safety protocols." The officers nodded, their minds racing with possibilities. Could this be a Terran rescue team, a warning from another human mission, or perhaps something they had never encountered before? The next several hours were spent decoding and analyzing the signal. It was fragmented and heavily distorted, the kind of transmission that suggested it had traveled through a region of space saturated with energy anomalies. Bits of it were unmistakably Terran patterns matching communication protocols used by Terra Command, but other parts were corrupted beyond recognition. It was a puzzle that demanded patience and ingenuity. Engineers, scientists, and cryptographers on the ship worked around the clock, adjusting frequencies, running simulations, and testing transmission algorithms to filter out the noise. As they worked, the crew felt a surge of renewed energy. After weeks of psychological strain and isolation, the signal became a beacon of hope. It reminded them that there was still a connection to the wider human network, that they were not truly alone, and that their mission might yet have a future beyond the void. Crew members began collaborating more efficiently, and even those who had been most affected by fear and doubt found themselves focused and determined. The signal, fragile and flickering as it was, but became a symbol of possibility, a reason to continue fighting against the oppressive uncertainty surrounding them. Once the signal was stabilized, enough to be partially understood, the content shocked the crew. It appeared to be a Terran voice, distorted but coherent. The message was cryptic, providing hints rather than clear instructions. "Aurora, anomaly sector, proceed carefully. Unknown hazards. Coordinates attached." The fragmented transmission contained a data packet with a set of coordinates that did not appear on any standard star charts. Captain Markov studied them carefully, cross-referencing them with their own maps. The coordinates pointed to a hidden corridor of space, one that seemed to bypass the most dangerous energy fields in the sector. It was as if someone or some organization had mapped a safe passage through this otherwise treacherous region, leaving a guide for anyone daring enough to venture through. The revelation brought both relief and concern. The crew realized that the signal was likely deliberate, that someone had anticipated the dangers of this sector and had left a lifeline for explorers like them. Yet it also raised new questions. Why had they been abandoned in this part of space initially? Had Terra Command known about the anomaly all along? And if so, why were they not warned before the mission began? These questions weighed heavily on Captain Markov, who knew that answers might not be forthcoming anytime soon. The priority was clear: follow the coordinates, navigate safely, and survive. The journey toward the signal's coordinates was not simple. The void itself remained unpredictable, its anomalies creating obstacles that forced the crew to remain vigilant at all times. Energy readings surged unexpectedly, gravitational distortions tugged at the ship's hull, and sensors picked up strange fleeting patterns that could not be explained. The crew had to combine skill, intuition, and teamwork to maneuver the Aurora through these hazards. Every action, from minor course corrections to full engine adjustments, required careful calculation. A single misstep could mean catastrophe. During this period, the crew also began to notice a change in the void itself. While it remained dark and oppressive, the region near the signal seemed slightly less hostile. Energy fluctuations were still present but less severe. Sensor readings indicated that the hidden corridor might be shielded by some natural or artificial phenomenon, creating a path of relative stability. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to provide a glimmer of reassurance. The crew felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that following the signal was not just a chance to reconnect with Terra, it was their best hope of survival. As they navigated deeper into this corridor, the crew discovered new anomalies, but these were different from the terrifying, chaotic disturbances they had encountered earlier. Some were beautiful cosmic phenomena that shimmered in colors they had never seen, clouds of interstellar dust reflecting faint starlight, and energy fields that pulsed rhythmically as if alive. Others were dangerous, requiring careful maneuvering to avoid hull damage or system interference. Each obstacle tested the crew's skill and teamwork, reinforcing the importance of trust and communication. Every success boosted morale, while every minor failure reminded them of the stakes. During this phase, the psychological impact of the signal became increasingly clear. The crew had endured weeks of isolation, fear, and hallucinations. Yet the presence of a deliberate communication, however distorted, had a stabilizing effect. It reminded them that human ingenuity had not been abandoned, that someone had thought ahead, and that the mission was still meaningful. Captain Markov encouraged the crew to focus on this hope, to let it guide their decisions and maintain their morale. Slowly, the fear that had dominated their daily lives began to shift toward cautious optimism. As the days passed, the corridor revealed itself to be a marvel of cosmic structure. Gravitational fields formed natural tunnels that allowed the ship to move with less energy expenditure. Energy readings that had once been threatening were now predictable, following patterns that could be anticipated. The corridor seemed designed to channel explorers safely through the heart of the anomaly sector. Whether this was a natural phenomenon or a deliberate construction by an unknown intelligence was a mystery, but the results were undeniable. The crew of the Aurora felt both awe and relief. They were witnessing something unprecedented, a hidden path through the chaos of space. Even as they navigated this corridor, questions about the origins of the signal lingered. Was it sent by Terra Command as a precautionary measure, anticipating the hazards of the sector? Or had it come from another human mission, lost or forgotten, trying to guide survivors to safety? Some crew members speculated about alien involvement, though there was no concrete evidence to support such theories. What mattered most was the practical effect. The signal had given them guidance and hope, allowing them to move forward with purpose rather than drifting aimlessly in the void. The journey toward understanding and survival through the corridor required the crew to work in perfect harmony. Engineers constantly adjusted propulsion systems to maintain course. Scientists monitored energy fields and cosmic phenomena, predicting shifts and avoiding hazards. The captain and officers coordinated navigation, making real-time decisions based on incomplete information. Every crew member, regardless of rank, contributed to the collective effort. It was a true test of human skill, cooperation, and resilience. The void had forced them to operate at the limits of their ability, and the signal had given them direction, focus, and determination. By the end of this phase, the crew of the Aurora had crossed a threshold. They were no longer passive observers in the void, struggling merely to survive. They were active participants in a complex, dangerous environment, guided by a signal that represented both mystery and hope. They had learned to adapt to the anomalies, to trust each other, and to maintain morale despite the isolation. The faint Terran voice that had pierced the darkness was more than just a signal. It was a lifeline, a reminder that survival was possible, and that the universe still held paths of wonder, challenge, and unexpected guidance. Captain Markov, looking out at the corridor illuminated by distant stars and cosmic phenomena, realized that the journey ahead would test them even more. The signal had provided a direction, but it had also revealed the scale of the challenges yet to come. The void was not simply a place to traverse, it was a force to be understood, respected, and navigated with skill, courage, and unwavering focus. And for the crew of the Aurora, the emergence of this signal marked the beginning of a turning point, from passive endurance to active navigation, from fear to cautious hope, and from isolation to a connection with something greater than themselves. The crew of the Aurora had followed the faint Terran signal into the hidden corridor, a route through the void that seemed to promise safety, guidance, and the first signs of hope in weeks. Yet, as they progressed deeper into the corridor, it became clear that the journey was far from over. The void, which had been passive and mysterious before, now seemed to challenge them directly. The subtle anomalies that had once tested their patience now became dangerous obstacles that demanded constant attention, creative thinking, and teamwork. Survival was no longer a matter of following coordinates, it had become a struggle against the void itself. From the very first day within the corridor, the crew noticed that their systems were under strain. The ship's propulsion units, which had been functioning adequately before, now required continuous adjustments to maintain stability. Tiny gravitational shifts caused by the corridor's unusual structure interfered with navigation, forcing the crew to recalibrate constantly. Life support systems began to show minor fluctuations in oxygen and temperature levels, and power surges became more frequent in the conduits that ran throughout the ship. Engineers worked tirelessly, sometimes for hours without breaks, repairing systems, patching circuits, and recalibrating instruments. Every crew member had a role, and failure was not an option. The difference between a minor inconvenience and disaster could be a single miscalculated adjustment at the same time. The psychological pressure on the crew increased. The corridor was unlike any space they had previously encountered. It was dark, yet punctuated by strange glowing phenomena that seemed alive. These bursts of light and energy were mesmerizing, but they also heightened the sense of vulnerability. Crew members reported experiencing hallucinations again, some seeing fleeting shapes outside the observation windows, others sensing movements in areas where nothing could exist. The isolation of space had not disappeared, it had simply transformed. Now the void seemed reactive, as if aware of their presence and intent on testing their resolve. Captain Markov recognized that maintaining mental stability was just as crucial as keeping the ship intact. She held group meetings, encouraged crew members to speak about their fears, and instituted strict schedules for rest, exercise, and observation. Discipline and routine became their anchor in an environment that threatened to unmoor them at every turn. Despite the stress, the crew began to notice strange, almost miraculous phenomena that aided them in subtle ways. During a routine exterior scan, Lieutenant Rami discovered a crystalline structure embedded in the outer hull. It emitted a faint energy that interacted with the ship's power systems, stabilizing fluctuations and providing minor surges of energy that were otherwise unavailable. Engineers studied it carefully, understanding that it might be a natural phenomenon or a remnant of some ancient technology. Regardless of its origin, it became an invaluable asset, helping the Aurora maintain propulsion, life support, and navigation in an environment that otherwise seemed hostile. The crew also discovered that these energy sources were not isolated. Similar anomalies appeared at intervals along their path, sometimes embedded in floating debris, sometimes forming strange patterns in space itself. By carefully analyzing their positions and properties, scientists on the ship were able to create a makeshift map of energy flows within the corridor. These flows provided temporary stability in areas where gravitational disturbances and radiation bursts threatened to overwhelm the ship. It was a delicate balance, requiring precise navigation and timing. Following these energy currents became both a survival strategy and a fascinating puzzle, one that tested the crew's ingenuity, patience, and analytical skills. As the Aurora continued, the crew faced physical and technical challenges that pushed them to the limits of endurance. External radiation bursts occasionally disabled parts of the ship's sensors, leaving sections of the corridor unused. Navigational errors became increasingly dangerous, and even minor miscalculations could result in collisions with debris or destabilizing gravitational currents. Engineers and pilots worked in tandem, performing complex calculations in real time to keep the ship on course. Every success strengthened the crew's confidence, while every mistake reminded them that the void demanded respect, precision, and constant vigilance. In addition to external hazards, internal tensions tested the crew's cohesion. Long hours, fear, and exhaustion created friction. Small disagreements over decisions escalated into heated debates, and personal fears began to surface in ways that challenged leadership. Captain Markov remained a stabilizing force, mediating conflicts and reminding the crew of their shared purpose. She emphasized that their survival depended not only on technical skill, but on trust, communication, and unity. Over time, even those who struggled with anxiety or doubt began to see the importance of collaboration, realizing that the void was an adversary that could only be overcome together. Amid these struggles, the crew made astonishing discoveries. While repairing a section of the hull, engineers found what appeared to be alien artifacts embedded within the outer plating. Though harmless in appearance, they emitted energy that subtly enhanced the ship's performance. It became clear that the corridor was not entirely natural. There was evidence of intelligent design, or at least intervention, in its structure. The crew speculated endlessly about the origin of these artifacts. Were they remnants of a long-lost alien civilization, or perhaps they were part of a previous Terran mission that had vanished into the void? The truth remained unknown, but the artifacts provided both practical benefits and a renewed sense of wonder, reminding the crew that exploration often comes with discoveries far beyond expectations. The presence of these artifacts also had a profound psychological effect. The crew, who had been on the verge of despair, now felt a mixture of awe and cautious optimism. They realized that the void, though dangerous, also contained resources and guidance if approached with intelligence and care. Each artifact, each pattern of energy, became a puzzle to solve, a challenge to overcome, and a sign that human ingenuity could adapt to even the most alien environments. It was a powerful reminder that survival depended not only on endurance, but on curiosity, creativity, and a willingness to learn from the unknown. The physical dangers of the corridor never fully disappeared. The void tested the crew constantly with unpredictable shifts in gravity, energy surges, and radiation bursts. Every successful navigation through these hazards required coordination between all departments, pilots, engineers, scientists, and medical officers. Each challenge was met with determination but also a sense of humility. The crew understood that their skills were impressive, yet insufficient on their own. Survival depended on their ability to work together, adapt quickly, and respect the power of the void. During one particularly harrowing episode, a sudden energy surge disabled the main propulsion system for several minutes. The ship drifted perilously close to a gravitational anomaly, and the crew had only seconds to respond. Engineers rerouted power from auxiliary systems while pilots performed precise maneuvers to stabilize the vessel. Every heart on the bridge raced as tension reached its peak. When the crisis was finally averted, the relief was immense. Crew members exchanged quiet words of encouragement, understanding that they had survived through teamwork, ingenuity, and sheer determination. It was a defining moment, showing them that even the void's most severe tests could be overcome as they progressed. The corridor began to reveal its structure more clearly. Energy flows formed patterns, debris fields created natural barriers, and gravitational currents established a rhythm that, once understood, allowed for more predictable navigation. The crew mapped these features meticulously, creating a dynamic guide that would aid them for the remainder of the journey. The combination of careful observation, technical expertise, and adaptability transformed the corridor from a threatening unknown into a navigable, if still dangerous, passage. The crew of the Aurora had grown stronger, wiser, and more unified. They had faced repeated crises, overcome technical malfunctions, navigated environmental hazards, and solved complex puzzles presented by the corridor. They had discovered alien artifacts and energy flows that provided practical assistance and a sense of wonder. Most importantly, they had learned to trust each other, adapt to extreme circumstances, and confront fear directly. The void, which had once been a source of terror and uncertainty, had become a proving ground for human resilience, ingenuity, and courage. Captain Markov looked at her crew, exhausted but resolute, and realized that they had transformed. They were no longer passive explorers in a hostile environment. They had become survivors, problem solvers, and pioneers. Each member understood the importance of discipline, communication, and teamwork in a way that no training or simulation could replicate. They had endured the most extreme challenges the void could offer and emerged not just intact, but stronger, more capable, and prepared for whatever lay ahead. The hidden corridor of the void had done more than test the Aurora's crew. It had reshaped them, forcing them to confront the limits of technology, mind, and spirit. It had revealed that survival required both skill and humility, courage and collaboration, curiosity and careful observation. And as the ship prepared to move toward the final stages of the journey, the crew carried with them not only the knowledge of how to survive, but the understanding that the void, for all its dangers, also held opportunities, discoveries, and the potential for extraordinary achievement. After weeks of navigating the treacherous void, following faint signals, and facing challenges that tested every skill, every instinct, and every ounce of courage, the crew of the Aurora finally reached a point where the darkness began to thin. The oppressive blackness that had dominated their lives in space slowly gave way to the faint glow of distant stars and the soft, warming light of a faraway sun. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the crew could see not just the void, but the promise of a destination, a place where their endurance, ingenuity, and bravery would be recognized, where they could finally breathe a little easier, and where the isolation of weeks and months began to feel less absolute. The emergence was not instant. It was gradual, a slow unveiling that seemed almost deliberate. The void itself appeared to retreat as the Aurora moved forward, as if acknowledging that the crew had proven themselves worthy. Sensors, which had been erratic and unreliable for weeks, returned to normal operation. Navigation became simpler, with the distant stars now providing accurate reference points. Energy readings stabilized, and the strange anomalies that had plagued the ship lessened in intensity. For the crew, each small improvement was a monumental relief. Every system that returned to normal operation was a victory, every stable reading a reminder that they had survived the void's relentless tests. The emotional impact on the crew was profound. For weeks they had been under constant pressure, facing threats that ranged from the physical to the psychological. They had experienced isolation, fear, hallucinations, and moments of doubt where survival seemed impossible. Yet now, seeing light and stars again, a collective sense of accomplishment and relief washed over them. Crew members who had been tense and withdrawn smiled quietly at each other, exchanged simple gestures of acknowledgement, and allowed themselves brief moments of reflection. The journey had changed them in ways that were deep and lasting. They were no longer simply explorers. They were survivors, having faced one of the most extreme and isolating experiences imaginable. As the Aurora continued its emergence, the crew began to scan for nearby systems, looking for any sign of civilization or human presence. It was a cautious search. The void had taught them that appearances could be deceiving, and that even the calmest regions of space could harbor unexpected dangers. Yet, the sensors finally picked up a familiar signature: a Terran communication relay station. Small and distant, but unmistakably human. The moment the crew realized that they had reconnected with Terran systems, an overwhelming sense of relief and joy swept through the ship. After weeks of silence, they could finally send a message, confirming their survival and transmitting their findings. Captain Markov personally sent the first transmission back to Terra. Her voice, calm and steady, carried a mix of professionalism and emotion. Aurora to Terra Command. We have emerged from the anomaly sector. All systems functioning. Crew intact. Full report to follow. The delay in response, which had once been a source of anxiety, now became a tool for cautious optimism. They waited, tense but hopeful, for the confirmation that their message had been received. When the reply finally came, acknowledging their survival and congratulating them on their perseverance, the sense of accomplishment was nearly overwhelming. The crew had endured the void, survived its tests, and proven the resilience of human courage and ingenuity, yet the experience had left an indelible mark. Each crew member carried memories of the void: the fear, the hallucinations, the strange anomalies, and the constant tension of survival. Even as they celebrated, they were aware that these experiences had changed them. Bonds had been forged in the crucible of extreme isolation. Friendships had deepened, and a shared understanding had developed among the crew that could never be replicated outside the void. Captain Markov reflected on this quietly, knowing that the leadership required in the void had transformed not only her crew but herself. They had learned lessons that could not be taught in simulations. Lessons about courage, trust, resilience, and the human spirit's ability to endure in the face of unimaginable challenges. In the midst of their return to normal space, the crew also reflected on the discoveries they had made. The artifacts found on the ship's hull, the energy flows within the corridor, and the hidden signals had all provided valuable data. Scientists meticulously recorded every observation, knowing that this information could redefine human understanding of deep space and the anomalies that existed beyond familiar sectors. The artifacts, in particular, suggested the presence of an intelligence, perhaps alien, perhaps human, that had deliberately structured parts of the corridor to guide or challenge explorers. These revelations would have profound implications for future missions, influencing navigation strategies, ship design, and the study of cosmic phenomena. Despite the relief and the excitement of re-establishing contact with Terra, the crew also remained cautious. The void had taught them that appearances could be misleading and that overconfidence could be dangerous. Every system was checked multiple times, every sensor reading confirmed, and every anomaly documented. This careful approach ensured that they did not let their guard down too soon, and it reinforced the discipline and vigilance that had kept them alive throughout the journey. Survival in the void had required constant attention, and the crew understood that their return to more familiar space did not mean that vigilance could be abandoned entirely. As the Aurora moved closer to inhabited space, the crew began to prepare for the reintegration process. They discussed medical evaluations, debriefings, and the transmission of detailed mission reports. They also began to anticipate the personal reunions that awaited them, messages to families, the sharing of their experiences with friends, and the possibility of recognition for the extraordinary resilience and bravery they had demonstrated. The psychological transition from extreme isolation to contact with civilization would be significant, and the crew approached it with the same care and attention that had guided them through the void. The final stages of emergence were not without challenges. Even as the void's grip weakened, small anomalies persisted. Minor system fluctuations, intermittent energy surges, and unexpected readings continued to remind the crew that space was never truly predictable. These final tests required careful monitoring, teamwork, and adaptability, reinforcing lessons learned during the most difficult parts of their journey. By successfully navigating these last challenges, the crew solidified their skills, strengthened their bonds, and confirmed that their survival was not merely a matter of luck, but of preparation, intelligence, and cooperation. When the Aurora finally entered a stable star system, bathed in the light of a distant sun, a collective sense of triumph swept through the ship. The darkness of the void that had dominated their lives for weeks now seemed like a distant memory, a trial that had tested every aspect of their humanity. Crew members took moments to reflect, to breathe deeply, and to appreciate the beauty and safety of a familiar star system. The psychological relief was profound, a mixture of joy, awe, and quiet gratitude. They had emerged, scarred but intact, tested but unbroken, and forever changed by their experiences. Captain Markov took a final moment on the observation deck, looking at the stars that now surrounded them. She thought of the void, the darkness, the anomalies, the constant challenges, and the lessons learned. She thought of her crew, who had shown resilience, courage and ingenuity beyond what she had imagined possible. She understood that their survival was not only a testament to technology and training, but to the human spirit's capacity to endure, adapt, and thrive even in the harshest environments. The journey had been more than a mission. It had been a trial, a transformation, and a story that would be remembered and studied for generations. As the Aurora approached its final destination within Terran-controlled space, the crew prepared for contact with command centers, research facilities, and eventually, their loved ones. Their story would become a legend, a case study in human endurance, resourcefulness, and the capacity to survive against overwhelming odds. Every sensor reading, every anomaly report, every decision made under pressure would contribute to a deeper understanding of space, survival, and the limits of human exploration. The void had tested them in ways no simulation ever could, and they had emerged not only alive, but wiser, stronger, and more unified than ever before. By the time the ship finally docked at a Terran facility, the crew was exhausted, yet a deep sense of satisfaction and achievement prevailed. Their mission, which had begun with exploration and curiosity, had transformed into a profound test of human resilience. The Aurora had survived, the crew had endured, and humanity had gained invaluable knowledge about the nature of the void and the potential for survival in extreme environments. The story of their emergence would be shared, studied, and celebrate, a reminder that even in the darkest and most isolating regions of space, courage, ingenuity, and unity could overcome fear, uncertainty, and danger. The final chapter of their journey was not just about returning to civilization, but about the profound transformation that had occurred during their voyage. Each crew member carried with them memories of challenges overcome, fears faced, and the extraordinary beauty and danger of the void. They had confronted the unknown, adapted to its demands, and emerged with a deeper understanding of themselves, each other, and the universe around them. The Aurora's journey from abandonment to emergence became a symbol of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable human spirit, proving that even in the most extreme circumstances, survival and triumph were possible.